Those of you who watch this show know I've made it my mission to give a voice to the marginalized moderate majority. Those of us who just want common sense solutions, refuse to get pulled into the partisan outrage machine where political extremists gin up anger for personal, political, and financial gain. Cable news outlets on the left and right know it works. They know stirring up our emotions gets them viewers, clicks, and even votes for their anointed candidates. Extremists effective at silencing those of us near the center. And I truly believe that's the majority of Americans. And there's more and more evidence of that. Scientists and researchers now confirming that we are more moderate than the extremes want to believe. They want to brand us to fit a particular label or political narrative. A new study out by the think tank Populace finds what it calls self-silencing. People being afraid to share their true opinions because of what others might think. And that's contributing to the political narrative that the country is way more divided on hot-button issues than it actually is. Quote, social pressure to have the right opinion is pervasive in America today. In recent years, polls have consistently found that most Americans across all demographics feel they cannot share their honest opinions in public for fear of offending others or incurring retribution. This trend is concerning because of the threat that it poses to individual freedoms, community flourishing, and democratic self-government. You think? On the topic of abortion, for example, the study found that despite an overwhelming majority of Republicans, 64%, saying publicly that Roe v. Wade should be overturned, only about 51% actually believed that privately. People most afraid to speak their minds on hot-button issues, according to the study, Hispanics and independents had the greatest gap between their public and private statements. And that comes into play on this next question, on if wearing a mask was an effective way to stop the spread of COVID-19. 59% of Americans publicly said yes, but privately only 47% actually believe that. The gap even wider for women and Hispanics. Now, political discourse in this country has become so toxic, uncivil, that people would rather go along to get along rather than be shamed for having a potentially unpopular or more nuanced take. Remember Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and his big battle with Disney over at company CEOs coming out against a state law banning talk of gender identity in grade school. The Disney CEO speaking out because progressives were so riled up, so angry with him for not taking a public stance. Was that the majority or just the vocal fringe shouting above the rest? When asked if CEOs should take a public stand on controversial social issues, 44% of Democrats said they should when asked publicly. That's 4 times as many Democrats who privately admit to caring. Just 11% actually felt that way when asked privately. And yet things like this are being used as wedge issues to get us raging, condemning, publicly pressuring those around us. We are all for more moderate. We're much more moderate than cable news would have you believe. And to a lot of us, the hot-button controversial topics that have cable newsers practically foaming at the mouth night after night don't matter nearly as much as they want them to, like critical race theory and the question of whether public schools are focusing too much on racism. More Republicans and independents agreed that public schools are focusing too much on racism publicly, but privately, less so. Support for the statement drops by double digits for both those groups in private. So where does all this silencing and shaming leave us? It leaves us feeling exhausted and angry, which leads us to the next poll. It just came out also. Democrats, Republicans equally angry ahead of midterms. Heading into election season, Democratic voters, 42% are just as likely as Republican voters, 41% to say the word angry describes how they feel about the midterms. So they got us right where they want us. They got us divided. They got us angry. And we can't even really say what we think. Angrier because we're told there's someone to blame, the other side, and silent because we're afraid to speak up. On this show, I promise you, the marginalized moderate majority out there has a voice. We don't traffic in outrage here. We keep it straight, factual, rational. We call out the rest of cable news and political extremes who want to rile us up. Joining us now is Todd Rose, co-founder of Populace, the think tank that did the research on who really believes what. Todd, thanks for coming on the show. Here's what I don't understand. How in this study, which I think is fascinating, do you determine what people would say in private versus what they say in public? How are they telling you what they say in private?
Well, First of all, it's great to see you. And, this is this tricky challenge, right? But fortunately, when there's a lot of social pressure, it turns out there's some really good, straightforward methods that scholars have developed to get around that social pressure. And it all boils down to being able to guarantee privacy and some plausible deniability. So there's some clever approaches that people can know when they download the report. You can see how we did it. But it's pretty straightforward, and this method is known to be a very good predictor of private belief and private behavior like voting.
And who is forcing us to say one thing publicly and something else private? I don't mean forcing it, but who's shaming us? Is it the media?
Well, look, it's actually, when we dig into this, it's actually this vocal fringe on both sides, right? So what's interesting is we're all doing this. We're all misrepresenting our views. It was pretty shocking. Every single demographic in the country is misrepresenting their views on multiple issues, but they're different issues, right? And so we're all being pulled to the fringes in public, and that's creating this sense of false polarization, which makes us angry. But something you brought up about this anger, it's not just that. Like, it's the fact that we don't feel like we can speak up, right? That there is a right answer and that we just got to toe the line. And so no wonder we're angry. We have opinions, we want to speak up, we want to hear from each other, but we don't feel like we can.
Todd Rose, great study, so interesting. Really appreciate it and appreciate your time today.
Thanks.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your cable provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.